Not too long ago, a report surfaced that Steelers wide receiver James Washington had asked for a trade. While that wasn't confirmed and was completely denied by Mike Tomlin, something James Washington said on Wednesday showed that maybe there's more smoke to that fire. We're going to break that down right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. And remember, this show is sponsored by rockauto.com. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today and tell them that Locked On sent you. Let's get into it.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. It is Thursday, August 19th, and training camp wraps up today for the Pittsburgh Steelers at Heinz Field. They'll move back to their South Side facility at the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex shortly after this last practice. This last practice at Heinz Field, though, is not open to the public, so there's that. But big thing here, when you look at this team as they're getting ready for their third preseason game against the Detroit Lions, a lot of storylines with that. But I wanted to talk to you all about James Washington. Now, as I said in my show yesterday with D9 Pietro and Josh Axelrod, it became even more apparent why the Steelers were not just going to trade James Washington away just because a story surfaced that he wanted to be traded. Because when Chase Claypool went down, even for just a minute, and it looks like he's going to be fine, he'll be back in no problem. And he was running around at practice, catching passes, looking fine, not practicing in full, of course, but he looked like he was going to be fine with whatever mild sprain he had in his ankle. But even with that brief scare, there was still that sense of security because why? You had James Washington with Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson. And you still had Ray McLeod as your fourth guy behind those three. That was huge. So, really conveniently timed, the Steelers allowed James Washington to talk to reporters after practice on Wednesday. And when asked about the validity of the trade request rumor, he said this, quote, "That's a private conversation. As far as me being happy in Pittsburgh, I love it here. Who wouldn't be happy playing football as their job? I come to work every day with a smile on my face, and I'm eager to be here with my guys, joking around, laughing, playing a sport I love." So let's be straight here. James Washington is not saying, he's not confirming or denying there, but he's basically confirming, you know what? That's a private conversation. There might have been something towards that. Maybe it was a flat out request. Maybe it was hey man, if you guys aren't going to use me, then I would like to be traded type of comment, or, push from his agent. Those things are all possible. At the same time, I know some Steelers fans are going to cling to, well, wait a minute. He says he loves playing football in Pittsburgh. He loves the Steelers. He loves his friends. These are his friends. He loves joking around with them. Those are his guys. Yes, all that can be true, but money comes first. You know that, and I know that. And James Washington was drafted in the second round, not to be fourth fiddle in a wide receiver room, and arguably seventh fiddle in the Steelers offense. And he wants to be able to prove to the world in his contract year that he deserves his money, right, in this upcoming offseason. Because remember, this next year, the salary cap's going to boom. Teams are going to be offering more money than they've been able to offer in any point in NFL history. A lot of things are going to change. Now, remember, of course, Mike Tomlin flat out denied that James Washington had requested a trade, and that he's been working fine with the team, and he has. I mean, I've been at every training camp practice. He's been there working hard. And in fact, on Wednesday, he had some really great catches, arguably one of the best catches in, of the practice, where he caught it in coverage, tight coverage in the corner of the end zone on a touchdown. There's no doubt that they want him around. But the fact is that there's only one football. And they drafted Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth. And they signed Eric Ebron to a big deal. And they brought back Juju Smith-Schuster. And Chase Claypool had 13 touchdowns last year. And Deontay Johnson may be the best at getting separation on the team. No, he's definitely the best at getting separation on the team. He may be the best in the conference if you look at the way that he's in his cuts. That's another debate, though. James Washington, though, still can go up and get the deep ball. Still a physical guy that can make tough catches. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he's tough to bring down because he's big, he's strong, he's athletic, and he gives it to guys that are in his way. Again, I've said this before. I don't see any bad guy in this situation. It's just, hey, in the NFL, there's a lot of talent, and sometimes guys who are very talented just don't get to see much time. And sometimes it takes going somewhere else to make it work. But James Washington, when you look at this situation and you see what the way that he's saying things, he's not saying anything bad about the team. And in fact, everyone's saying positive things about the team. And as was reported, in the first day after that report surfaced, when he first took the field for 7 shots, which is the drill where in training camp, the offense takes 7 shots from the 2-yard line to get it in the end zone. The first time he was on the field, Mason Rudolph stopped, threw a pass right to him. He caught the touchdown, and like half the team came and like mugged him and was like, "Good job, James. Good job." And there was a sense of like, okay, we see what's going on there, right? We know what that's about. But the Steelers are trying to make sure that he's in there. Now, one thing he also said when he was asked, has there been any discussions about an increased role for him in the offense? He said, quote, "It's been talked about, but I'm just trying to do what I can. I just want to show people I can be available and make the plays they want me to make. Just do what I need to do." Again, James ain't going to step outside of himself. This man has came to the locker room in 2018. And in 2018, they had Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster. They were just coming off of having Martavis Bryant. They've added Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. Lots of talent that have been around James Washington, but you've never seen him bark out about anything. You've never seen him step outside of himself. He's always just been the hard worker, getting better at his craft. And he even said in his first year, he was like, I was kind of intimidated by Ben Roethlisberger because he didn't really talk to me that much. And that was why you didn't see him do much that year. In 2019, you saw him step up in his second year in the league, and he led the Steelers in receiving even without Ben Roethlisberger being there. That's the thing I see about James Washington. He's going to be a hard worker, and the Steelers want to find a way to keep that guy around. So they're going to have to find a way to make sure that he gets his chances to show the NFL, hey, I can be a really talented receiver, and that makes sure that at some point he's going to get his financially, whether it's free agency, being re-signed with the Steelers, or what have you, he's going to get his. There's a lot more details on James Washington. We will see them play out with Chase Claypool being out this week in preseason. Presumably, he's not going to play in this upcoming game because the Steelers are going to try and take it easy with that. James Washington is probably going to get a lot of looks in this game against the Lions, where Ben Roethlisberger is reportedly going to at least start the game. Maybe that'll be a chance for him to kind of get the feel like, okay, I can be part of this offense. And maybe that's a chance for the Steelers to say, James, we believe in you. You will be part of this offense. I know it's kind of rough seeing the new running back, the 2 tight ends, and the 3 other receivers ahead of you. But there is a plan for you in Pittsburgh. But there's other plans being made that are adjusting things around the team. I'll get to that in just a bit. But first, I got to tell you guys about rockauto.com. Because remember, if you're trying to save time and money, go use rockauto.com. If you need a new part for your car or truck, you can end up spending 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts when you go to a chain store or a car dealership. For example, if you go and get a Honda Odyssey fuel pump, it's $353 from a chain store. But on rockauto.com, it's only $216. Rock Auto is a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you could need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. And remember to write "Locked On" in their How did you hear about us box, so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Carter Critiques. Remember, you can subscribe to this show on YouTube by subscribing to our YouTube account, Locked On Steelers. You can also listen to the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Odyssey. That's Audacy, Odyssey. All those different apps to listen to us to. And if you give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, you get a shout at the end of the show. But let's keep it rolling here. There was another position group that struck my interest with what we saw at camp, and it's been widely reported. On Wednesday, we saw a different look with the first team defense in the secondary. Now, not with the safeties, Mink and Terrell, they're the same. But instead of seeing a lot of Arthur Maulet or Antoine Brooks in the slot, and by the way, I will say Arthur Maulet, the team's free agent get from the New York Jets in the offseason as a slot option, has not looked bad. He's at least been competitive. He looks like a guy like, hey, I'd plug him in if I needed him. But the Steelers tried something that we've talked about a bit on this show by putting Cam Sutton from the outside into the slot and putting, guess who, James Pierre on the outside. Now, if you're a longtime fan of the Locked On Steelers podcast, you know our boy Tony Serino. He is the leader of the James Pierre hype train. Toot, toot. He has been saying since February, this man is the next guy at cornerback. Now, listen. I'm the last person that tries to build up Tony's ego because he also said Devlin Hodges was going to be something. And I was like, get out of here. The guy won't make it out of training camp. And the next thing you know, he wins several games for the Steelers at quarterback. But in all seriousness, James Pierre has continued to impress throughout training camp and preseason. He had a solid couple snaps in the playoff game against the Browns, even though they lost. He looked really good in OTAs, looked really good in minicamp, and now he's looked really good in training camp. And he's running with the top receivers on the team. They match him up with Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, James Washington, all four of them, and he has had plenty of wins against them. They've beaten him too sometimes. But he's been lockstep with all of them. And we saw an adjustment in how the defense lined up on Wednesday at Heinz Field because we saw Cam Sutton play in the slot where he is very comfortable. That's one thing that I've said about Cam Sutton since they drafted him in 2017. If you go back and look at his Tennessee Volunteers tape from college, the guy could play strong safety, free safety, outside corner, inside corner, slot corner, whatever. Whatever it was, he played it. He found a way to be useful to his defense. And that's where I see maybe they're like, you know what? His versatility is his biggest strength. And they took a gamble by extending him this offseason and saying, hey, we'll pay him good money to keep him around. And Steven Nelson left shortly after that. But James Pierre has come in and he's looked pretty solid. And this was what I was talking about on Steeler Nation Radio with Wes Euler and Arthur Moats and Adam Crowley. We always talk about 2 dogs, 1 bone in training camp because you want to see this guy over here and this guy over here fight for this one spot, right? And that one spot is what you want to say, okay, whoever wins this out, they had a good competition. That person got better because of that competition, and now we're confident about this position going into the season. But as I said, I think this was always more of a 4 dogs, 2 bone situation. Because really, you were looking to see if someone could solidify themselves at slot corner and someone can solidify themselves at the outside corner. And if no one jumped in and was supreme at slot corner, and the 2 guys battling for slot corner were Antoine Brooks and Arthur Maulet. Antoine Brooks, the second-year player out of Maryland, more of a box safety, started off really strong in training camp, but got hurt after the first preseason game. Only started to see the field a little bit actually on Wednesday, still has been hurt up for a while, and that's allowed Arthur Maulet to kind of take hold of the lead in that position. But we know Cam Sutton can play the slot because that's what he's been doing for the past several years along with Mike Hilton. And so that's the first bone with 2 dogs. The second bone with 2 dogs has been the cornerback battle. And arguably, you can even say it worked into being a 3-dog, 1-bone situation because originally I was going to say James Pierre and Justin Lane were the 2 guys that were battling at cornerback behind Cameron Sutton to say, hey, I'm the next guy in line at outside cornerback. Cam Sutton was always going to be ahead of one of those guys. But the issue was if there's a battle between Justin Lane and James Pierre, and the winner of that battle is better than the winner of whoever wins out the slot position battle between Antoine Brooks and Arthur Maulet, why not put Cam Sutton back in the slot where he's better than those guys in the slot? And James Pierre is your other option there. And James Pierre has flat out beaten Justin Lane in this conversation. Justin Lane's made some plays. In the first game, he had a forced fumble. In the second game, he had an interception. And he even had I'd say he has steadily improved in this training camp. This is the most improvement I've seen out of Justin Lane. Not to be fair, he did have COVID last year where he didn't get COVID, but with COVID year last year, that stunted his growth. But still, this was his time. He had to step up this year and make some noise. And early on in training camp, wasn't looking good. Was getting beat, got bulldozed by Chase Claypool a couple times in blocking practice and blocking drills. And even those plays that we saw in the preseason games where he forced a fumble, he gave up a 20-plus yard completion on third down before he forced that fumble. Good job sticking with the play, but they'd probably prefer a cornerback who could jump in front of that or at least fight the ball and make sure it never got into the hands of the receiver in the first place. And the interception also wasn't a jump pass. It was more like he was kind of playing, a conservative coverage and the quarterback missed and he just had active hands and he caught it. And hey, opportunism, good job. That's what you want to see out of a cornerback when those moments happen. But you also want to see being able to adapt and attack the ball and attack the receiver and make the play yourself and not require a grave mistake from the other team to make that play. James Pierre hasn't had those problems. He's been making plays on the ball. He's been breaking passes off. But I will also say Mark Gilbert, number 17 in the secondary, he has truly stepped up at the cornerback position as well. He has broken up pass after pass, and he's been lining up with some of the top receivers too and also winning some of those battles. Now, granted, I think he's lost a considerable percentage more of those than James Pierre has, and that's why James Pierre is still the guy there. But Gilbert could be pushing Lane for that next cornerback spot. But if Pierre is so solid on the outside and they feel very comfortable with him, more so than they feel about Arthur Maulet or Antoine Brooks, why not put him on the outside, give him a shot, let him rock out there, and then you put Cam Sutton back to the slot where you've known for the past 3 years that he can be sufficient in. And then you see, okay, Mark Gilbert, Justin Lane, then you have backups in the slot. Then you maybe you have some depth answers there where maybe you didn't think you had depth answers before at cornerback. And I still don't rule out the possibility that this team is done adding to their roster via trades or signings or what have you. Because remember, with the restructured contract of Stephon Tuitt, as I talked about with Jenna Harner on our Tuesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast, there's plenty of space to continue to add to this team with the salary cap space. Doesn't mean they will. Could be salary cap space is going to roll over. Could be used for the TJ Watt signing. All those are possibilities. But after seeing Joe Schobert get signed earlier this week, that should be a call out to every veteran on the roster that's not named Minkah Fitzpatrick or TJ Watt or Cam Hayward or Stephon Tuitt or Ben Roethlisberger or Najee Harris. That your job, and Najee Harris is a rookie, he's not even a veteran. But point being, if you're not one of those top tier guys, you should think that your job is on the line. Also put Joe Hayden in the guys that wouldn't be in that conversation. And so maybe there's an addition coming at cornerback if this James Pierre thing doesn't work out. But maybe it does work out, and we're sitting here talking about, wow, there's really nothing to worry about this whole time about the cornerback spot. But there's another position group that we always are going to talk about until we see them come to pass, and that's the offensive line. We're finally seeing some things with them. I want to talk about that with you guys in just a second. But first, I got to tell you guys about BetOnline.ag, the best online sportsbook with football season right around the corner. You want to get on all the gambling action at BetOnline.ag, the best online sportsbook. You can get all the odds on records, stats, awards, season winners, and looking on the NFL season right now for BetOnline.ag. Pittsburgh fans, one of the bets you can make right now, the over-under for wins for your team, the Steelers, is at 8.5. That means with the new 17-game season, as long as the Steelers get a winning record or avoid a losing record for the first time in Mike Tomlin's history and for the first time in team history since 2003, you can win money at betonline.ag, but just taking the over. Say, hey, they're going to win 9 wins. I believe in this team that much. easy money you can make right now on betonline.ag. You can also still bet on all the Major League Baseball action going on this summer, but before the next pitch and before the next snap, go to betonline.ag on your laptop or mobile device right now and check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information. You can head to their website and get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit by using the promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON, all capital letters, all one word, locked on when you go to betonline.ag, your online sportsbook experts. Wrapping things up here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Remember, you can listen to this show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and Odyssey. But I wanted to talk to you guys about this offensive line because one of the biggest concerns we've had all of training camp, right, was when are they going to play together? Because going into this offseason, Zach Banner, torn ACL, wasn't able to play. Didn't even play a whole game last year because it happened in the first week of the season. And he still was recovering throughout the offseason. And even when he got back early in the preseason, Chukwuma Okorafor had an injury. Kevin Dotson had an injury. They signed Trey Turner as a free agent. And they drafted Kendrick Green as a center. So there's a lot of new moving parts needing to figure out where they fit on this offensive line. And when Zach Banner was finally back, Kevin Dotson was out with injury. Chukwuma Okorafor was out for his injury. He had to plug in Haig at one of the tackles and Rashad Coward at a guard position. And BJ Finney or JC Hassenauer at center because there were a couple days where Kendrick Green took a personal day. But for the last 2 straight days of training camp, we have seen all 5 guys line up next to each other. And there's been some impressive plays. Now, both practices on Tuesday and Wednesday were in full pads. But they weren't 100% let's see what you got full pads, right? Because that's when training camp starts and Mike Tomlin says, like, I want to see who gets miserable today. If you ever seen that clip, that's the way he talks about training camp. He wants to see who can get down in the muck of training camp, the minutia of it, the part of it that's like, man, I'm so bored, I hate this, but still love it and have fun in it. That's the stuff that he wants to see. And they did plenty of that all throughout the first few weeks of training camp. But now they're entering the 3rd preseason week. And this team's had a lot of bang ups, and they've had some scraps that I talked about with Jenna Harner with on Tuesday. Dan Morse Jr. seems to love to fight some people. But now they're at a point where like, hey, we're gonna put on pads. There's gonna be some hitting. But like when Najee Harris gets into the hole, they're not trying to bring him down all the way. When a wide receiver catches a pass, they kind of like make contact, but don't bring him down. Don't tackle him. I think that's because they're trying to make sure, hey, like we're just trying to make sure that we're not going too hard. Let these guys recover their bodies a little bit. They've got a game on Saturday at home that they'll be playing in. But I'll say this about them: the offensive line, they've gotten beat by this defensive front a bunch. You got Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt hasn't been practicing yet. He's still working his way back from a rough offseason. Remember, his brother passed away or died at this offseason, and that was devastating to him and his family. So he's not, he has to kind of get back into his groove to be football ready a little bit, and we expect that to happen soon. We just don't know how soon, but the Steelers are more than happy to give that man his space. But Cam Hayward, Melvin Ingram, Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt still sitting out from practices, but being ever involved in all the talks. He's hanging out with the guys. He's doing work with medicine balls. He's doing drills on the sidelines, just hasn't put on his pads yet. But that defensive front, even without Tuitt and Watt, is still a killer and still would be one of the better ones in the NFL. And they've been giving it to this offensive line. But this offensive line has also fought back a bit. There's been some plays where Najee Harris has gotten some good space to work against them. And that's also with Devin Bush and Joe Schobert in there as a linebacker pair. Now, I will say this. Devin Bush is one of those guys. I think that there's another reason that they got Joe Schobert is because he still hasn't fully recovered yet. Because he hasn't been able to blanket tight ends and run with guys the way that he was before he was hurt. Before he was hurt in 2020, he was giving up a completion percentage of about 52.7%. Of players who played approximately 20% of the most linebacker snaps in the NFL that year. That was number 2 in the NFL. So he was finding a way to contribute a lot of ways last season before he went down, on top of being a top tackler. So Joe Schobert coming in and playing next to him also might be a way to say, hey, young guy. And I talked about this with Arthur Moats on Monday. Hey, young guy, this is just more of a get into your role, feel comfortable doing what you do. And when you're back to 100%, then we'll see. The Steelers also said that might not be so sure that Devin Bush just lost the green dot like that, as was being reported out of training camp. So we'll see how that plays out. But back to this offensive line as we're wrapping up the show here. This is probably the group we're watching the most. All eyes will be on Ben Roethlisberger and how much he can throw the deep ball, because everyone wants to see that happen this year. And there will still be eyes on Najee Harris and Alex Highsmith and James Pierre and those guys. But this offensive line finally gets to play together. And then you need to start building chemistry. And offensive line is one of those groups that may take the most work to build chemistry in the NFL. It will not be easy. Because, like I said, when you're an offensive line, you need to step on with the correct foot at the correct times, at the exact times, to make sure that you're moving as a unit and getting the job done to beat the defenders in front of you. The reason the Steelers work so hard to keep Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, Alejandro Villanueva, Ramon Foster, Mark Gilbert, or guys they worked in like Matt Filer, Kelvin Beachum, other guys over the years. The reason they wanted to keep that core together so long was because they had that chemistry. And every year you didn't have to come in and work and say, okay, we got to develop new chemistry with new group guys. No, this group was together for so long because they had the chemistry. That group's gone now. David DeCastro's injury was nagging too much. Marquise Pouncey he had played. I think his time in the NFL had come to an end. Ramon Foster retired. Villanueva just not at his best anymore. All of them are gone. So now you get new guys in, but it's going to take time and patience to see that group come together. And the fact that they didn't get to come together until about the fourth week of preseason football, or fourth week of training camp, that tells me they may have a little bit of work to do. But we will see that work as we get ready for the third preseason game against the Lions this Saturday at Heinz Field, the only home preseason game. I will be there in the press box covering the game live, so follow me on Twitter for my live comments during the game about what's going on, and then you'll be able to see what happens after the game, or you'll be able to come to this YouTube channel, podcast app, wherever you listen to us or watch us, to get my reactions to the game, and then we'll be back to our regular programming on Monday. But the offensive line, that has to be where the most progress is seen from this team on Saturday. We got one more show before that game, though, so stay tuned. We got a lot coming your way right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Remember, you can watch and subscribe to us on YouTube. We have a full YouTube channel. If you're listening to us, check us out on YouTube. It's great. It also helps us out with our subscriber count. Also, if you're enjoying our podcast on any of the different apps, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Odyssey, thank you very much. Subscribe to us there. Also, rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts with a positive comment, and you get a shout at the end of the show. I'm Chris Carter. Thanks again for listening to the Locked On Steelers podcast. Be back in your ears very soon, getting you ready for that next preseason game.